The hospital room door was half open. Caleb Marsh stood in the corridor with a paper bag of flowers in his hand. Dahlias, her favorites, orange and deep red, and he did not go in. He had driven 40 minutes to get there. He had brought the flowers because Donna loved dahlias and because that was the kind of man he was. He had left the shop early, told his apprentice to lock up, and driven through an October afternoon that was all low light and turning leaves, thinking about nothing in particular except getting there. And now he was standing 12 feet from the door of room 214, and he could hear her voice through the gap, unhurried and unguarded. The voice she used when she believed she was alone with someone who already agreed with everything she thought. Rachel, she was saying, Donna's best friend. Rachel's voice was lower, confirmatory, the sound of someone listening hard. Caleb did not move. He did not move for perhaps 30 seconds, long enough for what he was hearing to stop being sounds and become meaning, long enough for the meaning to become something he could not unknow. "He is just furniture," Donna said. Her voice was easy. Not cruel, that was the thing that would stay with him longest afterward. She said it the way you say a thing you have decided is simply true, the way you state the weather or describe a room. "You know, he has always been furniture. I just never had the courage to look for a real room." Rachel said something he couldn't make out. Donna laughed. Soft, warm, the real laugh. Caleb Marsh stood in the corridor of St. Anthony's Hospital with October dahlias in his hand, and he did not go in. He would be standing in a different room in 4 months, his own workshop, early light, the smell of fresh oak and sawdust and machine oil. And he would understand then what he had actually been holding in that corridor. Not grief. The beginning of a plan. He had been with Donna for 11 years, 9 of them married. The kind of marriage that looked correct from the outside, the house, the dinners, the holiday photographs, and felt, from the inside, like something that functioned, not something that thrilled. But Caleb was not a man who required thrilling. He was a man who required solid. And the marriage had been solid in the way a structure can be solid even when the load it was designed to carry has quietly shifted. He had met her at a party he hadn't wanted to go to, a work thing that his older brother Marcus had dragged him to in the particular way Marcus had always dragged him toward things that turned out to be important. Donna was standing near the window talking to 2 people she clearly found less interesting than she appeared to. She was sharp and funny, and she laughed at something Caleb said almost before he finished saying it, which he had taken, at 29, as a sign of intelligence. He still thought it was a sign of intelligence. He had just learned, over 11 years, that intelligence and direction were separate things, and that a person could be entirely sharp and entirely certain that the destination they were heading toward was somewhere better, without that destination ever becoming specific. Donna's unhappiness had always been ambient. He understood that now. Looking back, he could trace it, not to a single event, not to a failure on anyone's part, but to the particular quality of a person who had grown up moving and longing for stillness, and who had found stillness and decided that stillness was the problem. She had wanted the arrival. The arrival, when it came, had not been as clarifying as she'd needed it to be. He had given her everything he had. Not perfectly. He had been tired, sometimes, in the way people who work with their hands are tired. The specific exhaustion of a body that has done real things all day. He had been quiet more than she wanted him to be. He had not always been present in the way that presence is sometimes performed, the active, demonstrative showing up that some people needed as proof. But he had been there. He had shown up to the things that required showing up. He had repaired the small failures of their life together with the same patience he brought to his work. He had believed that was what love looked like when it was serious. He had not understood that Donna had been waiting, for years, to stop pretending she believed it too. He walked back to the elevator. He pressed the button. He stood with the dahlias in his hand while the elevator came. He drove home. He set the flowers in a glass of water on the counter because they were dahlias and they would only last a few days, and there was no reason to let them die in a paper bag. He sat at the kitchen table, in the house that had been his grandfather's and was now his, and he thought about the word furniture. The ease of it, the particular absence of animosity in the way she'd said it. Not that he was a bad person, not that he had hurt her, just that he was an object. Something that occupied space in a room without being the reason anyone came to the room. He had spent 22 years making furniture. He was aware of the irony. He didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was in pieces. He was not in pieces exactly, which surprised him. He had expected grief to arrive the way it arrived in movies, sudden and oceanic. Instead, what he felt was more like the feeling of confirming a weight your body has already been carrying, without knowing its name. A kind of grim resolution, the sensation of a fog lifting, revealing a landscape that had always been there. He thought about Rachel. He thought about what Rachel knew, and what she had been told and for how long. He thought about the laugh he had heard through the gap in the door, the realness of it. He had not heard that laugh directed at him in a long time. He did not call Marcus that night. He waited until the next morning, because the next morning his hands would be steadier and his words would be more ordered, and Marcus deserved the ordered version, not the version Caleb would have given him at midnight, with the dahlias still on the counter and 11 years of marriage making their recalculations somewhere in the back of his chest. At 6:15 in the morning, the light still blue, he picked up his phone. Marcus answered on the second ring. Hey, it was all Marcus said. And from the single word Caleb could tell that Marcus, who had always been better at reading situations than people gave him credit for, already understood from the hour and the tone alone that this was not a check-in call. I need to talk to you, Caleb said. Come to the house, Marcus said. I'll make coffee. Caleb drove across town in the early light with the windows slightly down, the cold air sharp and clarifying, and he thought about the foundation of a building, specifically about the way a foundation can develop a hairline crack that is invisible from the surface for years, bearing load without complaint, until the load shifts by 1 degree in the wrong direction and the crack opens into something you can no longer ignore. He had seen it happen to houses. He had repaired it twice, in old structures that the owners had loved and wanted to save. The repair was possible, but you had to start with the crack. This was the crack. He had been with Donna for 11 years, and the arithmetic of those years was not complicated. He had been 29 when they met. She had been 28. He had been running the shop out of a rented space on the east side of town, building custom pieces for people who had been recommended to him, and following up every commission with the same attention he would have given a structure meant to last a century, because that was what he thought work was for. She had been 2 years into a marketing position at a firm that suited her intelligence and frustrated her ambitions in equal measure, which meant she was exactly the kind of sharp, restless, not yet satisfied person who could convince you, in the early months of knowing them, that the restlessness was forward momentum rather than a permanent condition. He had not been wrong that it was intelligence. He had been wrong about the direction. He thought about this, driving home from Marcus's kitchen, watching the city go by in the October morning light. Not with anger. Anger was a form of misdirection, and he was not interested in misdirection. Just with a clear-eyed assessment of a man going back over the structure of something he had built and identifying, calmly and without drama, where the load had been miscalculated. The signs had been present. He understood that now. Not betrayal signs, not the things that arrive in movies, the found receipts and strange phone calls and a marriage that collapses around a single revelatory fact. The signs had been quieter and more continuous than that. The way Donna spoke about his work at dinner parties, warmly, yes, but with the slightly elevated quality of a person translating something from a language they found limited. He made beautiful things. Wasn't that lovely? He was so talented with his hands. The emphasis that landed each time slightly differently than she intended. Beautiful, lovely, talented with his hands. The vocabulary of appreciation that stopped short of respect. The way she had, over the years, introduced him to new people. Her husband is a carpenter, she would say. And then she would add, quickly something that functioned as a correction, he does custom work. High-end stuff, it's really quite remarkable. As if the word carpenter required amendment. As if she needed the person she was talking to understand that he was the acceptable kind. The kind that could be admitted to a room where the other people worked in offices. He had never corrected her about this. He understood now, allowed the performance of managing his social presentation to proceed, because he did not want to make her uncomfortable about something she clearly needed. He had thought that was grace. It was, in part. It was also, in part, permission for her to keep a version of him that was smaller than the actual one. He was the actual one. He had always been the actual one. She had simply not thought to check. 11 years. He had kept the shop through the lean first year when Marcus had loaned him the capital to cover materials, and he had paid it back within 18 months. He had built the client base from word of mouth alone, which was the only kind of reputation he trusted, because the only thing you could not fabricate in word of mouth was the quality of the work itself. He had hired Thomas 2 years ago when the commissions outgrew one pair of hands, and Thomas had turned out to be the kind of apprentice that made you remember why you had wanted to teach. Not because he was brilliant, though he was capable, but because he had the patience, the willingness to do things correctly, even when correctly took longer than approximately. The Halcyon Hotel's contract had come through a referral from a client in Portland, who had known one of the hotel group's regional directors. It had been the largest commission in the business's history by a factor of 4. The negotiation had taken 3 months. Caleb had signed it on a Tuesday in March, 2 years ago, and driven home and told Donna the business had landed a significant contract and she had said that's wonderful, and asked what was for dinner. He had not told her the number. He had not decided, consciously, not to tell her. He had simply said the words the business had landed a significant contract and watched her receive them as confirmation of something she already believed, that his work was fine, that it would continue to be fine, that it occupied whatever space in their life it occupied, and had not felt compelled to expand on them. He thought about that choice in the car on the October morning, driving through streets that were still mostly quiet. He thought about whether it had been withholding, and decided it had not been. It had been the decision of a man who understood that some information belongs to the person it concerns until they are asked for it directly, and who had understood, at some level, that the version of him Donna was managing did not need to be updated, because the management itself was the problem. You could not fix someone's model of you by giving them better data. The model had to want to be revised. Marcus's kitchen smelled like strong coffee, and the particular domestic order of a man who lived alone and had made his peace with it. Marcus was 54, 13 years older than Caleb, broad through the shoulders and careful in the way people who work with structures are careful. The careful of someone who has learned to measure twice, cut once, and never assume a wall is non-load-bearing without checking. He had poured 2 mugs before Caleb had finished sitting down. He listened without interrupting. Caleb told him everything in the order it had happened. The drive to the hospital, the dahlias, the half-open door, the 30 seconds in the corridor. The word furniture delivered with all the effortlessness of a settled opinion. He did not editorialize. He simply told it. Marcus held his mug in both hands and looked at the table while Caleb talked. And when Caleb was done, Marcus was quiet for a long moment before he said, "How long do you think it's been?" "Not just the feeling," Caleb said. "The plan." Marcus nodded slowly. Because that was the thing. The plan was in those words. Not "I feel this way," not "I've been unhappy." The courage to look for a real room, That was a woman who had already looked for the room and found it, or had it in mind. "How much does she know about the house?" Marcus asked. Caleb looked at his mug. "She knows I grew up in it. She knows my grandfather left it to me. She does not know the deed predates the marriage. She has always assumed, I never corrected the assumption, that we own it together." Marcus looked at him. "I know," Caleb said. "You need to talk to someone today," Marcus said. "Not tomorrow." Caleb nodded. "I know someone. Dad used your name when he called them about the Hartley property. A family law attorney, Simone Reeves. Downtown office." Marcus was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call ahead," he said. "Get you in today if they can." Caleb sat with his coffee while Marcus made the call. Through the kitchen window he could see the backyard. The old maple Marcus had been threatening to take down for 3 years because one of the large branches had developed a slow rot. The branch was still there, hanging over the corner of the garage, still bearing its own weight, still looking fine from a distance. You had to know where to look. Simone Reeves saw him at noon. Her office was clean and deliberate in the way of a person who had decided what mattered, and had stopped keeping what didn't. She had the straightforward quality of someone who had spent years in rooms where people were at their worst, and had decided the correct response to that was clarity, not warmth performed. She was warm in her own way, just not the kind that asked anything of you. She heard him out. She asked 8 questions, precise and in the right order. When he was done, she opened a legal pad. "Let me tell you what you have," she said. He had the house. The deed was filed in his name alone. Premarital, unambiguous, the house had never been refinanced into joint ownership. The business, Caleb's Cabinetry and Finish Works, Incorporated, was also his alone, predating the marriage. The contract with Halcyon Hotels, the largest commission in the business's history, had been signed and was in effect. Its existence was not unknown to Donna in general terms. She knew the business was doing well, but its specific value a multi-year agreement worth more than the house. She had never asked about, and Caleb had never volunteered. "She has been operating," Simone said, "with a model of what this divorce looks like that does not match the legal reality." "She has been operating," Caleb said, "with a model of a lot of things that don't match the reality." Simone allowed the smallest nod of acknowledgement and returned to her pad. "What she has a claim to," she said, "is marital assets accumulated during the 9 years of the marriage. Her income contributions, joint purchases, shared accounts. That is meaningful. It is not the house. It is not the business." She looked at him over her reading glasses. "I need everything documented. The deed, the business incorporation date, the hotel contract, the full financial picture. If there is anything she could claim was a joint contribution to the business, her funds, her active participation, tell me now." "There isn't," Caleb said. Simone made a note. He called Simone from the parking lot of the shop before he went in the next morning. She answered on the second ring with the focused energy of a woman who had been at her desk for an hour already and was accustomed to early calls from clients with evolving situations. He told her about the text, the unknown number, the information about Donna's real estate attorney. He told her he could not verify the source, but that the information felt credible given everything else. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It changes the pace but not the position. The position is solid. You know that. I know that," he said. "What it means practically," she said, "is that she is moving on a timeline that is not yours. Her attorney will look for leverage. Pre-marital ownership is not leverage. Sole business ownership is not leverage. What they look for in a case like this is any contribution she can argue entitles her to equitable interest. Have there been improvements to the property during the marriage? Renovations? Work done with joint funds?" He thought about it. He had repainted the exterior 2 summers ago. He had replaced the deck boards the summer before that. He had used his own account for both, the business account technically, which was clean and separate. He told her this. She made a note. What about her income contributions to the household during the marriage? She contributed to groceries and utilities, he said, on a shared expense model. Her salary never went to the house directly. That's documented? Bank records, he said. I can pull them. Do that, Simone said. Everything, complete picture. 9 years. He went into the shop and called Thomas to take the opening hour. He sat at the desk in the back office, a small room off the main floor, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs. The kind of office that existed for paperwork and phone calls and the periodic administrative reality of running a business. And he pulled 9 years of banking records and compiled them into a file that he sent to Simone before noon. In the afternoon, he drove to his grandmother's. Eleanor Marsh was 74 and had lived in the same house for 41 years. A narrow clapboard on Birch Street that her husband Robert had built the kitchen of the year before they were married. She opened the door before Caleb was halfway up the walk, which was how she always opened the door. She heard the car in the driveway and was there by the time you arrived, not hurrying, just already in motion. He told her what had happened, sitting in the kitchen at the oak table where he had done his homework as a boy, with the smell of chamomile tea and the particular warmth of a room that had been a kitchen for 41 years, and was saturated with the history of meals. Eleanor listened without expression until he finished. Then she folded her hands on the table and looked at him. The house is still in your name, she said. Yes, he said. Good, she said. Your grandfather put it in yours for a reason. He looked at her. I know, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The clock on the wall moved through a full minute. Then she said, without drama, as if she were simply adding a fact to the record, I never thought she understood what you were. He didn't say anything. Not a criticism of her, Eleanor said. Some people can't see that kind of value because they're looking for a different kind. She wasn't wrong that you're steady. She was wrong that steady was small. She poured more tea into his cup, though he hadn't asked for it. What are you going to do? She said. What I do, he said. Carefully, without rushing, making sure the joints are right before I put weight on them. She looked at him with the expression she had been giving him since he was a boy. Not pride, exactly, which required distance. Something more immediate. Recognition. Good, she said. He left her office with a list of documents to gather and the particular feeling of a man who had spent the morning holding something heavy and had now, without fanfare, set it down in the right place. Not relief, exactly. Something more specific. The feeling of a problem that had been shapeless taking its correct shape. He went back to the shop. His apprentice, a 23-year-old named Thomas, who had started with him 2 years ago and had turned out to have the right hands for this work, was sanding the face frame of a built-in unit for a client in Ridgewood. The shop smelled like oak dust and the tung oil they'd been finishing the side panels with. The machines were quiet, because Thomas worked by hand when Caleb wasn't there to supervise the table saw. Caleb hung up his jacket. He went to his workbench. He picked up a piece of white oak he had been dimensioning for a corner cabinet commission, ran it through the planer once to check the face, and set it back. He stood with his hands flat on the bench and looked at it and thought about nothing at all for approximately 45 seconds, which was how he had always reset himself after difficult things. Put his hands on something real. Let the room come back to him. Then he got to work. Donna came home from the hospital the following evening. Her appendix had been routine, the surgery had been non-emergency, scheduled a week in advance, a precautionary removal that her doctor had been recommending for 2 years. She came through the door with a small overnight bag and a careful expression that Caleb recognized as the expression of a woman who had been thinking in a hospital room for 4 days and had arrived at conclusions she had not yet spoken. He helped her with her bag. He had made soup, a slow-cooked vegetable soup that had been on the stove since mid-afternoon, the kind that filled the house with the particular warmth of something done with patience. She looked at him, with the expression. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," he said. They ate together. He asked about the recovery, about the restrictions her doctor had given her. She answered carefully, her eyes occasionally searching his face for something he was not offering. She had come home expecting to find him in a particular state, worried, attentive, the version of Caleb she had learned to manage, the one who processed grief inward and could be counted on to hold very still while the world rearranged itself around him. He was warm. He was present. He was not still in the way she expected. Something in her expression shifted slightly. A small recalibration. He did not help her with it. After dinner, she went to bed early, doctor's orders. Caleb washed the dishes, put away the soup, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and spent an hour listing every document Simone had asked for, noting where each one was filed, making sure the list was complete. He found the house deed in the firebox in the hall closet, the same place it had always been. He photographed it with his phone and emailed it to Simone's secure filing system before he went to bed. He slept well. What he did not know yet was that Donna had arrived home not only with conclusions, but with a timeline. And the timeline was already moving. She was careful for 2 weeks. That was the period Caleb would later think of as the performed marriage. The version of their life that Donna ran like a project she needed to complete correctly before she could close the file. She made coffee in the morning. She asked about his work with the interest of a person who had decided that interest was required. She attended her recovery with diligence and without complaint, and in the evenings she watched television in the living room with the contented air of a woman at peace with where she was. He watched her perform all of it. Not with bitterness, with the particular attention of a man who understood surfaces and what they concealed, who had spent 2 decades working with wood that could be beautiful on its face and rotten at the core, and who had learned to check the core before he committed the face to anything permanent. The text was a Thursday. He had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered, a habit of years, and when he came back downstairs, Donna was sitting at the table with her own phone. And his was face down on the counter exactly where he'd left it, and she looked up at him with a measured smile and said good morning, and he said good morning back and picked up his phone. There was a text from a number he didn't recognize. It had come in at 7:02 a.m. "You should know your wife has a real estate attorney on retainer. She's moving faster than she's letting on." A friend, he read it twice. Then he set it face down. He made his coffee. He stood at the counter and drank it and looked out the window at the backyard where the Japanese maple he'd planted 4 years ago was holding its color well into October. The leaves a deep, saturated red that would last another 2 weeks if the weather stayed. He texted Marcus, "Call when you can. No rush." Marcus called in 11 minutes. "I got a tip," Caleb said. "She's already retained a real estate attorney." Marcus was quiet for a beat. "Where are you? Kitchen? She there? Upstairs? Okay. Call Simone now, not later." Now, Caleb called Simone from his truck, parked in front of the shop before he went in. He told her about the text. He could not confirm its source, the number was unknown, not in his contacts, but the information fit the shape of what he already knew. Simone was calm. She asked if he'd heard the name of the attorney. He hadn't. She told him it did not materially change anything. The house was his. The business was his. What a real estate attorney retained by Donna could do was attempt to argue an equitable interest claim based on years of shared occupancy and alleged joint contribution to the property's value. "Can she win that?" Caleb asked. "With what she has," Simone said. "No, but she could slow it down." "Yes," Simone said. "She could slow it down." He sat in his truck for a moment after he hung up. The shop was quiet at this hour. Thomas wouldn't arrive for another 40 minutes. The morning light was coming in low from the east, cutting across the street at the particular flat angle of October before 8. He thought about the 3 nights at Marcus's. He did not know yet that they were coming. But he thought about how this went, the sequence of it, the countermove before the move, the attempt to put him off balance before the real conversation had been had. He had seen it in business disputes, twice in negotiations that had gotten adversarial. The opening play was always the same: take the ground before the other person thinks to hold it. He went into the shop. He worked. He did not bring it home. The attempt came on a Wednesday. He arrived home from a site visit in Ridgewood to find Donna standing in the kitchen with a document in her hand and her real estate attorney's card on the counter, and a carefully composed expression that was trying to be apologetic and arriving, through effort, somewhere close. She had filed for a legal separation, she said. She thought it was better to be honest about where they were. She had spoken to an attorney who advised that given the circumstances, her limited income, her contributions to the household, she had grounds to petition for occupancy rights pending the divorce settlement. She did not want to do that, she said. She wanted this to be civil. She hoped they could work it out together without it going that direction. Caleb listened to all of it. Then he said, "Are you asking me to leave my house?" She looked at the document in her hand. She said the attorney advised it was the fairest way to manage the separation period. He said nothing. He picked up his jacket, his phone, his keys. He told her he was going to his brother's. He drove there. He did not slam the door. Marcus was in the driveway when he pulled up, as if he had known, which he may have. Marcus had the quality of a man who paid attention to the way situations developed and made reasonable predictions. He was on the phone with Simone before Caleb had finished his first cup of Marcus's coffee. Simone told him what she needed him to do. He did it. He sent the documents, answered the questions, confirmed the chain of ownership. The deed was undisputed. The premarital ownership was documented and unambiguous. The claim of equitable interest on the basis of occupancy was challengeable. She would file the response in the morning. He slept in Marcus's guest room for 3 nights. Not because he had to, Simone could have challenged it faster, but because Marcus had suggested he stay, at least for the moment, and Caleb had been willing to give Simone the room to move. The 4th morning, Simone called. The occupancy petition had been denied, she said. The filing was clear. The house was his. He could return home. He thanked her. He ended the call. He looked at the guest room, Marcus's spare room, tidy and impersonal, the room of someone passing through. He had been here before, in this room after a different thing, a failure of a different kind, some years back. Temporary rooms were not where he lived. He was a man of foundations. He lived in the place he had built. He packed his bag. He drove home. Donna was not there when he arrived. He didn't know where she was, and did not try to find out. He put his bag in the bedroom and went downstairs and made himself breakfast. He ate it at the kitchen table with the October light coming through the window, the Japanese maple visible from where he sat, its leaves still deeply red, still holding. He had lost 3 days and a little sleep. The plan was still exactly where he had left it. The performed marriage had a texture to it that Caleb studied without appearing to study. He had been, his entire professional life, a man who observed surfaces. Not because surfaces were the thing was always beneath, but because surfaces told you what was worth examining more closely. The grain pattern on a piece of wood told him the tree's history before he could see its structure. The way a joint sat told him whether the person who had built it had understood load or had simply approximated it. He had been reading surfaces for 22 years, and he was good at it. Donna's surface during those 2 weeks was impeccable. She was kind in the specific, deliberate way of a person who has decided that kindness is the best instrument available for the outcome they want. She was present in the evenings in a way she had not been for months prior, at the table, engaged, asking questions about his work with the attentiveness of someone who had decided to perform interest as a strategic act. She touched his arm in passing, briefly, with the calibrated frequency of physical reassurance, that was neither too much nor too little. He received all of it at face value in the way he received all presented surfaces, by noting it, filing it, and looking for the structure underneath. The phone was the clearest signal. He did not need to read her messages to understand what the changed angle of the screen meant. He understood it the same way he would have understood a hairline in a beam. Not yet a failure, but information about where the failure was already happening. She was having conversations she did not want him to encounter. The nature of those conversations he could approximate from what he already knew. He said nothing about the phone. He was a patient man. He had always been a patient man. Donna had identified this quality correctly in the corridor at St. Anthony's when she told Rachel that he processed inward. She was right. He did process inward. What she had miscalculated was what that processing produced. She had assumed it produced passivity, a man turning his grief into silence, his silence into withdrawal, his withdrawal into the gradual relinquishment of a fight he had decided not to have. She had not understood that the processing produced clarity, that the stillness was not surrender. It was the stillness of a man who had measured the load, confirmed the foundation, and was taking the next step in the correct order. He thought about this on the Thursday afternoon after the text, working alone at the bench with Thomas out on a delivery. The shop was quiet. The light through the north-facing window was the flat, even light that was best for this kind of work. No shadows to mislead the eye, no glare to wash out the grain. He was cutting mortises for the corner cabinet, the work requiring a level of concentration that made the rest of the world temporarily inaudible. He liked that about this work, the way it asked for your full attention and, in exchange, gave you the quiet. He had been thinking about what Donna didn't know, and what she didn't know was substantial. Not because he had hidden things from her. He had not, exactly, but because she had stopped asking. She had been managing an exit for long enough that she had already, in her own mind, stepped out of this life and into the next one, and in the next life she had planned, his business was what she believed it to be. Fine, steady, admirable in the craft fair sense, the kind of work that was impressive when you explained it to people who then said, "Oh, how interesting," before moving on. She had no idea about the hotel contract's second-year extension. She had no idea that the Portland client, the one who had made the original introduction, had since referred 2 additional properties, and that Caleb had been in negotiation for the past 6 weeks about a third, a boutique inn in coastal Maine that wanted the full treatment, custom built-ins for every room, a restored bar cabinet from an original fixture he had sourced through an estate, and a commission value that would, when signed, put the business in a different category entirely. He had not told her any of this. Not because he was hiding it. Because she hadn't asked since the Tuesday dinner 2 years ago when he had said the business landed a significant contract. And she had said that's wonderful and asked what was for dinner. He set the chisel and tapped it through the last mortise. The joint was clean. It was exactly right. He put the chisel down and looked at his work and thought, that's all any of it is. You get the foundation right, and then you build correctly from there. The rest is just time. He called Simone that afternoon. "Is everything in place?" he asked. "Everything is in place," she said. "I want to move to mediation," he said. "I want to be in a room with her, and I want the table to show her what the table actually shows." Simone was quiet for a moment. "Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready," Caleb said, "since I was standing in a hospital corridor." The mediation was in a conference room on the 9th floor of a building downtown. It was a Tuesday. The room had a long table, pale wood, the kind that looked chosen to be neutral, nobody's table, just a surface where things got decided. There were 2 chairs on one side, 2 on the other, and a mediator, a composed woman in her 50s named Helen, at the head. Donna came in with her attorney. Caleb came in with Simone. He had not seen Donna face-to-face since the morning he left for Marcus's. In the 2 weeks between, she had moved with a kind of cautious velocity, gathering her case, communicating through attorneys, performing what Simone described as a standard opening posture for someone who believed they were negotiating from a position of equal leverage. She sat down across from him. He looked at her directly. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked at Helen. She had prepared for several versions of this conversation. He could tell the particular quality of her composure had the slightly effortful quality of rehearsed certainty. She had thought through what he might have. She had run her own numbers. She was ready. Helen opened the mediation with its procedural framing. Both parties acknowledged. Then the table was opened. Simone placed the first document in the center. The house deed. Pre-marital title. Caleb Marsh, recorded 2003. A full 7 years before the marriage. Donna's attorney looked at it. There was a pause that contained a great deal. Donna looked at the document. Then she looked at Caleb. Something moved through her face. Not the surface, she held the surface, but underneath. The second document was the business incorporation. 2009, 1 year before the marriage. Sole proprietorship, subsequently incorporated, sole shareholder. Donna's attorney said something in a low voice to Donna that Caleb couldn't hear. Donna said something back. Her voice was even, but the tempo was slightly different from when she'd come in. The third document was the Halcyon Hotels contract. Multi-year service agreement. Custom cabinetry and finish work for 12 properties across 3 states. Total value over the contract period, documented. Donna looked at the number. The room was quiet. Caleb, she said. Her voice was measured. He is keeping everything? Helen said. The assets under discussion are legally owned by your husband prior to and independently of the marriage. The marital estate, she knows what the documents say, Simone said, without heat. This is an opportunity for her to understand what the negotiation is actually about. Donna looked at Caleb. For the first time since they'd sat down, she looked at him the way people look at a person when the story they had constructed about that person has been replaced by the actual one. When did you get the hotel contract? She said. 2 years ago, Caleb said. You didn't tell me. No. He said. Why not? He held her gaze. Because you had already decided what this was worth, he said. And I did not want to watch you recalculate. Donna opened her mouth. She closed it. The silence landed the way silences do, when a thing that was unsaid for a long time is finally allowed to take up the space it had been waiting for. He has always been furniture, he said. His voice was even, entirely level. He said it the same way she had said it, plainly, almost gently, the way you state a thing you have decided is simply true. You know, he has always been furniture. I just never had the courage to look for a real room. Donna went completely still. The color moved in her face the way it does when a person realizes they have been overheard at the exact moment they believed they were private. Not one emotion. Several at once, passing through too fast to name. He did not need to name them. I came to the hospital, he said. I had flowers. I got to the door of your room and I heard you tell Rachel what you actually thought. And then I went home and I put the flowers in water because they were dahlias and there was no reason to let them die. He said all of this at the same pace he said everything. Warm, unhurried, without a raised voice or a dramatic gesture. Then I called my brother, he said. And then I called my attorney. And then I went back to work. Because that is what I do. Donna looked at the table. The table held what it held. The deed, the business, the contract, the full, documented, legal reality of what had always been true, irrespective of what either of them had assumed, or performed, or planned around. Her attorney spoke quietly in her ear again. She sat with it for a long moment. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. She had very still hands. He had always noticed that about her, that her hands were still even when everything else in her was moving. Then she said, "What are you offering?" Simone placed the settlement document in the center of the table. It was fair. Caleb had been clear with Simone, not punitive. Her contributions to the marital estate were real, and they would be accounted for. The joint account balance, split, the furniture, the word did not escape him, divided equitably. Her car, in her name. The wedding gifts they'd been given, allocated between them. There was a maintenance payment for 12 months while she transitioned. It was, as settlements went, more than she had a legal right to demand and less than she had planned to take. It was fair because that was the kind of man he was. And possibly, though he did not say this, because the only way to leave a thing with your foundation intact was to leave it cleanly. Donna signed the mediation agreement on a Friday afternoon. Her attorney called Simone to confirm the terms. Everything she had expected to leave with, she did not leave with. The house was not in the conversation. The business was not in the conversation. The hotel contract, which she had not known existed in its full form, had not asked about, had not thought to ask about, because she had already decided what Caleb was worth and stopped looking, was not in the conversation. What she left with was what she had brought, her income, her half of the joint savings, her car, the clothes and personal belongings she had packed into the 2 weeks before the mediation with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been packing mentally for much longer. A maintenance payment for a year, which was more than she'd expected, and which Caleb had insisted on including over Simone's mild suggestion that he wasn't obligated. She left with her plan and found it smaller than the life she'd left. Rachel called Caleb a week after Donna moved into the apartment she had, as it turned out, already identified. The call was awkward in the way of someone who has been party to a conversation they regret and are trying to decide how much to own. He let her say what she had come to say, which was essentially that she was sorry, that she hadn't known the full picture, that she had been listening to Donna for months without understanding what Donna was building toward. He told her he appreciated the call. He didn't ask her what else Donna had said. He didn't need to know. He already had the essential thing, the one line, clearly stated, in his wife's unguarded voice, in the corridor of a hospital on an October afternoon with dahlias in his hand. That was the line that had opened the crack wide enough to see the foundation clearly for the first time. Some things, when you finally see them, cannot be unseen. That was not a wound. That was information. Simone sent the final paperwork in November. He signed where indicated and returned it. She called to confirm receipt and he thanked her, and she said, in her straightforward way, that it had been clean work, meaning his documentation had been clean, meaning he had given her everything she needed to do her job correctly, and she appreciated that. He understood what she was saying. In his work, clean was the highest compliment. Clean joints. Clean lines. Nothing carried by the finish that should have been solved in the foundation. He thought about that for a while. The last thing Donna said to him directly, not through attorneys, not in mediation, was in the kitchen on the morning she loaded her car. She had been in the house for 2 more weeks after the mediation, which he had agreed to because it was practical, and because there was no reason to make it harder than it needed to be. She stood in the kitchen with her last bag and looked at the house the way a person looks at a place they are leaving and are not sure how to carry. "I didn't expect the hotel contract," she said. "Finally." "I know," he said. "That's a lot to not know about someone." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It is." She held his gaze for 1 moment. Then she picked up her bag and went out the front door. He stood in the kitchen and listened to her car pull out of the driveway. He stood there until the sound was gone. Then he made coffee. Then he went to work. What she had not expected, at the end, was the simplest truth of all, that the man she had written off as furniture had been quietly, methodically, without announcement or performance, building the most significant work of his professional life during the same years she had been managing her exit strategy. He had not hidden it to surprise her. He had not hidden it at all. He had simply worked. The work had simply grown, and she had not thought to look, because she had already decided what she was looking at. That was the math. It was not complicated. By December, the shop had more work than it had ever had. The Halcyon contract had brought referrals, not through advertising, not through any active effort on Caleb's part, but through the particular alchemy of work that was genuinely excellent finding its way to people who recognized excellent work when they encountered it. 3 new commissions in November alone. Thomas had asked, carefully, whether there might be room to bring on a second apprentice in the spring. Caleb had told him to find someone with the right hands, and he would handle the rest. He hired a landscape architect named June to address the overgrown border along the back of the property, a commission that had been on his list for 2 years and that he had not gotten around to because there had always been something more pressing. She came on a Thursday morning, walked the property with a notepad and a practical eye, and told him what she thought in the direct language of a person who did not over-explain things they were certain about. She noticed the Japanese maple. "That's been there a while," she said. 4 years, he said. "I planted it the fall we moved in." She looked at it for a moment. "It's got good bones," she said. "Whatever you do back here, build around it." He would think about that sentence for a while, though he didn't tell her so. June came back 3 times in January. The first time was to lay out the plan she had drawn up for the back border. A long planting bed that would anchor the yard visually without competing with the maple, low-maintenance things chosen for what she called structural interest, meaning things that held their shape through winter and didn't require you to do anything to them except let them do what they were designed to do. She had drawn it on paper, which Caleb appreciated, not a software rendering, an actual drawing, with measurements annotated in pencil and 2 options labeled A and B with a brief note on each. He chose option A. She nodded like she had expected that. The second time she came to mark out the bed boundaries and review the soil with a matter-of-fact competence that Caleb found restful in the particular way he found most competence restful. The way a well-built joint was restful, not requiring your attention because it was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and not calling for help. They had coffee afterward in the kitchen because it was cold, and she had been outside for 2 hours, and it was the correct thing to offer. She looked at the kitchen cabinets with the eye of a person who noticed construction. "Those are old," she said. 60 years, he said. She looked at them more carefully. "Mortise and tenon," she said. "You can tell from the doors." He looked at her. "My grandfather built them," he said. She considered this. Then she looked at him. "And you?" He gestured at the cabinet he'd been finishing for the Portland Commission, staged against the far wall in its temporary location before delivery. She looked at it. She was quiet for a moment. "Same hands," she said. "Different generation." He thought about that for several days afterward. The third visit was in February, to check on the planted bed after the first real freeze. She walked the border with her hands in her coat pockets and assessed each plant with the unhurried certainty of someone who understood that plants, like well-built structures, were not required to prove themselves in the first season. You planted correctly, and then you let time do what time did. She found him in the shop afterward, marking out a new commission, a library wall for a house in Kennebunk, floor to ceiling. The kind of work that would be in the room for the next 100 years if it was done right. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "It occurs to me," she said, "that I've been here 4 times and I don't know what this shop actually produces." He showed her around. The corner cabinet. Nearly done. The sample panels for the Kennebunk Commission. The photographs on the wall of completed projects. A kitchen restoration. A built-in library in a renovated Victorian. The first installation at one of the Halcyon properties. 12 rooms of custom cabinetry photographed by the hotel group's own photographer and used in their promotional materials, which was the kind of endorsement that could not be purchased. She looked at the photographs for a while. Then she looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a person who is adjusting what they know about another person and is comfortable saying so. "I thought you were a handyman," she said. He almost smiled. "People often do," he said. She nodded at this in a way that suggested she was filing it. Then she looked at the Kennebunk drawings on his bench. "What's the timeline on that? 8 weeks if I push, 12 if I do it right." 12, she said. He looked at her. 100-year work, she said. "Don't rush 100-year work." He thought about June occasionally after that. In the way you think about a person who has said something that was already true before they said it, but that you hadn't heard stated quite that plainly before. Not with urgency, with the patient attention he brought to things that mattered. He was, above all things, not a man who rushed. His grandmother Eleanor came to dinner on a Sunday in December, the same as she always did, the same as she had done every Sunday she was able since he was old enough to eat at a table. She was 74 and still entirely herself, precise in the way of a woman who had never wasted words, warm in the way of one who understood the difference between warmth that cost something and warmth that was simply the correct response to another human being. She had not said much about the divorce. She had listened when he told her, and then she had said, "This house has good bones." And then she had changed the subject to the winter tomatoes she was trying to grow indoors, and whether he thought grow lights were worth the electricity bill. At dinner she looked around the kitchen with the particular look of a woman surveying something she loves and finding it intact. "Your grandfather would have been glad," she said, quietly. "That it's yours," she said. Still, he looked at her. She was cutting her bread in the efficient way she'd always cut bread, not looking up. "He built this kitchen. You know," she said. "The cabinets. Every one of them. He did it the year before we were married. He wanted it done before he brought anyone else into the house." Caleb looked at the cabinets. He had looked at them 1,000 times and knew their construction without examining it. He had assessed them with a professional's eye years ago. White oak. Raised panel doors. The joinery done by hand, tight at every corner, still square after 60 years. "They're still holding," he said. Eleanor looked up at him. "That's the whole point," she said. He drove her home through December streets that were cold and lit, and on the way back he thought about what it meant to build things that held. Not buildings, exactly, though it was buildings he knew best. The principle beneath the buildings. The idea that the thing worth making was the thing that continued to be itself long after the moment of its making was past. That the test of the work was not how it looked when it was finished, but how it held when it was carrying weight. He had built a business that held, a house that held, a life that held, even when the person he had tried to build it with had decided the building wasn't worth her time. He thought about the corridor in St. Anthony's Hospital, the half-open door, the dahlias in his hand, the 30 seconds that had changed everything and, in another sense, changed nothing, had only revealed the shape of what had already been true. He had not gone in. He had gone home. He had put the flowers in water. He had called Marcus at 6:15 in the morning. He had sat across from Simone Reeves and laid out the facts in order. He had slept in a guest room for 3 nights and come home to the house that was his. He had sat in mediation and delivered a single sentence in his own voice, calm and exact, and watched it land in his wife's face with the weight of a thing that was simply true. He had not yelled. He had not broken anything. He had not done any of the things the anger would have suggested if he had let the anger lead. He had simply shown her the foundation. The rest of it, the math, as Simone would say, had followed on its own. It was a Friday in January when he went back into the shop before dawn. Thomas would arrive at 8. The commission on the bench was a corner cabinet for a family in Portland, white oak, a matching piece for a set that had been built in 1962 by someone who knew what they were doing. Caleb had been asked to complete the set. to build a cabinet that would stand alongside 60-year-old work and not call attention to the seam between then and now. He stood at the bench in the early quiet and looked at the oak he had dimensioned the day before. He ran his hand along the face grain, feeling for anything the eye might miss. The grain was tight and clean. No checking, no soft spots. The wood was exactly what it needed to be. He picked up his marking gauge and set it to the mortise depth. Outside the window, the January morning was doing its slow work of becoming light. The temperature was in the 20s. The yard behind the shop had a thin layer of frost on the grass that would be gone by mid-morning, and through the bare branches of the oak tree at the property line. The first pale suggestion of dawn was coming in from the east, the quiet, unhurried light of a day that had no interest in yesterday's weather and was simply the next thing. He pressed the gauge to the oak and drew the line. He had work to do. The kind of work that lasted. The kind that held its weight quietly, without asking anyone to notice. The kind that would still be standing 60 years from now when someone who hadn't been born yet ran their hand along a cabinet face in a house they loved and thought, whoever built this knew what they were doing. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. Some things hold because they were built to hold, laid deep, measured true, not given to movement when the load shifts. Caleb Marsh had spent his whole life building those things. It turned out he had been one of them all along. If this story reminded you of someone who never got the credit they were owed, someone who built quietly, in the background, while the world looked the other way, share it with them. They'll know why. And if you haven't already, leave a like and find us on the next one. We've got another story waiting that I think you'll want to hear.